This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a former child star who's been immortalized for his portrayal of the rambunctious and defiant Mike Teevee in one of the world's most popular movies, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which is a magical, psychedelic fairy tale that has captured the hearts of multiple generations. Our guest also appeared on Broadway in Mame and the Rothschilds. As an adult, he's had a diverse and successful career. He had his own travel agency. He was in real estate. He was in film production and casting. He worked at Disney. He's been a financial consultant. And from time to time, he's appeared on TV shows and made personal appearances at movie conventions and autograph shows. I'm delighted to welcome Paris Themmen to our show. Paris, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Harvey. How you doing? Boy, you covered so much ground. And the other thing I would like to say, since I'm rambunctious and defiant, is that none of that is true.
Absolutely not true in real life.
No.
Good
I
to
hope
know.
not.
Well, you grew up in Boston and your parents were both highly accomplished classical musicians. So was it a given that from a very young age you would go into show business?
Sure. A lot of that is true. I was born in Boston. I grew up in New York City. I lived in Manhattan from, I want to say, age 5 until about age 30. So really, I was a kind of a New Yorker, although I was born in Boston. My parents did meet at a conservatory in Boston. My mom was a pianist and a composer. My father was a conductor and a clarinetist. And it was because of their connection to classical music and a little bit like playing in the pits of Broadway shows and stuff like that. I think that's part of the reason that my mother brought me to an agent at a young age when I was 6 years old to see if I should be an actor.
Before we get to Willy Wonka, I want to ask you about your memories of working with the legendary Ann Miller on Broadway in Maine.
Okay.
What were your impressions of her?
I was 6 years old. They actually brought my older sister in to see maybe she'd be good for commercials. And I was kind of along for the ride. And the agent said, how about him? I booked a commercial, the first commercial I went out on, which was for Jif peanut butter. I got another one called Crazy Bubbles, which was like a seahorse-shaped piece of plastic. You blow into it and bubbles came out and you hang out in the bath. I was able to say crazy bubbles, bubble blowing, bubble bath 3 times fast. And I was one of the only kids that could do that. So they hired me for that one. Oh, in my case, of course, I said crazy bubble, bubble blowing, bubble bath because I had that lisp that everybody liked eventually for voiceovers. So I was doing a lot of commercials. And then, yeah, my mom would, as a pianist, would come in and play for me for the audition. And I booked Mame on Broadway, as you said, with Ann Miller. Ann Miller was kind of as you would imagine her to be. She was sort of like, she had kind of grande dame energy. You know, she would come into the room and she had a beautiful, I forget if she had an apartment or if she lived at the Pierre Hotel on Fifth Avenue, but she was like a movie star, you know? They added a 4-minute tap to Mame for her. So she came out and did like a 4-minute tap, which is kind of a long time for, I don't know how old she was, but if she wasn't 60, she was pushing 60. And here she is on Broadway and she's tapping away. She would finish the tap, come off stage, collapse into a chair. They would give her oxygen, and then she would go back out and she would take her curtain call and she would take, not, for the tap, not for the play, but for the tap, she would come and take the applause. I mean, if you know Mame, Mame is about that kind of a character. It's about that kind of a woman, who has an aura and brings it with her. So she was well suited for the role.
And so she had the same charisma and magnetism that we saw on the stage. You saw that off stage too.
I did, absolutely. And she was very kind to me. She was very like, I don't remember exactly the words, but my dear boy kind of thing, oh, and isn't he so cute? And I was invited to her Again, I don't remember if it was an apartment or a large hotel room, but I was invited there, and you know, she was very sweet and very nice, and yes, definitely had that same persona off as well as on.
That's just incredible. Now, there you were, 11 years old when Willy Wonka was made. Was the
Yeah.
audition process stressful for you at that age?
When you're a kid, and you've probably heard a lot of child actors say this, but it's really just pretend. I mean, you make a fort out of cushions in the living room, and you pretend that you're in a war or on the Wild West. It's the same thing, really. You just sort of it's because as a child, as a teenager, and I think they're really learning until you're about 30, your mind is really very plastic, and by plastic, I mean plasticity. You're very flexible. Everything goes in. If you learn a language at a young age, you really learn it. And I think that's part of what allows you to just really throw yourself into a circumstance and just take the adjustment that I'm really there. Add to that the fact that by doing, I was really getting an education in acting from a very young age at 6. So by the time I was 11, I've been doing it for 5 years. And I like to think when I look back at what I was doing, I was actually playing actions and pursuing objectives and dealing with obstacles. And I wouldn't have called them that, but I was doing all those things. And I was rambunctious off camera as well. You maybe are going to get to this later on in your interview or something, but I think I was sort of a combination of directable and spirited.
Well, you described yourself back then as being a manic, loose cannon, bouncing off the walls and making trouble.
Sure, there you go. So now you feel fleshed it out a little bit. I was the youngest. I was 11. The others were like 13. Julie Dawn Cole, who played Veruca, on her 13th birthday, sang the song I Want It Now. Peter was 13. Yeah, I was younger, I was smaller and spirited, as I said, bouncing around. I have a memory of when I lived in Manhattan in an apartment on 101st and Riverside. There was a particular refrigerator and molding that I liked to climb onto. And my grandmother on my mother's side called me a monkey or a wild monkey or something like that. So I was that sort of you know, where is he? You know, kind of kid. Yeah, what's he up to?
Is it true you were the one who let the bees out of the jar?
I figured that was the next place we would go, and I'm impressed at how well prepared you are. But I know you have a background as an attorney or I think weren't you like an in courtroom, either
I
attacker
was
or
a judge.
defender?
I was a
A
judge.
judge. There you go. Okay, so you're very familiar with preparation leading to a line of inquiry. So yes, as far as the bees are concerned, I have to disappoint people. I have no memory of releasing the bees. And furthermore, because people have brought it up over the years, I've had to sort of examine, does it make sense that I would have done it, even though I don't remember doing it? So there were bees on set. In the inventing room, there's a machine that makes the gum that Violet chews and it becomes, eventually sort of inflated with blueberry juice. And on that machine are several things. There are boxing gloves that go like this, and there are plates and things that are stamping. And one of the things is presumably to add honey to the gum, bees under a bell jar, right? A whole hive of them. And there's a close-up shot of the bees. That machine, the place where it was stamping is probably, I'm going to say 40 inches off the ground. And then there's another sort of spirally thing like this. And then above that is a bell jar, which is, if you don't know what a bell jar is, it's completely made of glass. There's no way to get into it. The way to get into it would be to either lift it or tip it back like this, right? So the theory then is that as a kid who was the smallest, I was, again, I'm maybe 45 inches tall or something like that, climbed up onto the shelf of the thing, stood up or kneeled up high, and reached up and released the bees so that they could then, terrorize the entire cast as Denise Nickerson, who played Violet, was wont to say. I don't think so. I don't remember doing it. And I think what's much more likely is they were dealing with live animals, which bees are. And of course, on set, they're going to get out. In fact, there is a picture of me. If you look very closely at this picture, here we go. I'm going to try to bring it up. This is my chin. Can you see this mark on my chin that's right here?
Yes.
I think that's a bee sting. And I think I was bitten by a bee. I was stung by a bee on set. And then, they did this.
And that's how you got blamed.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't know exactly. I just tell you that as I reconstructed in my head, it seems very far-fetched to me.
Now, Paris, it's fairly well known that Jean Stapleton was first offered the role of your mom, Mrs. Teevee, but she was too busy filming the pilot for All in the Family, so Nora Denny got the part. How do you think Jean Stapleton would have been in the role?
So, first of all, it just reminds me that there was a second Broadway show that I was in that you mentioned, which is
The Rothschilds.
And what happened with me actually is I was cast in The Rothschilds as an original cast member exactly at the same time that I was cast as in Willy Wonka. So I had to choose. And, my mother and I, mostly my mother, and probably decided that I should go do Willy Wonka. And that probably turned out to be the right choice. And when I was done with the movie, I actually was able to then go back and replace as one of the kids. They had lost one of the kids. So I got to do both. I got to have my cake and eat it too. So when you talk about Jean Stapleton, that reminds me, she had a choice to make and she went in one direction and never went the other. I actually was able to do both. So that's nice. I mean, again, I think Jean Stapleton made the right choice. I'm sure she would have been fabulous, but wow, Edith Bunker. I mean, that is iconic. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of backstage footage of Jean Stapleton, but I would be very surprised if she actually spoke that way. I think she absolutely created a complete character, sent her voice up an octave, dumbed herself down several IQ points, and just created a wonderful thing. And for that reason, I don't think she would have done it like Edith Bunker. I think she would have created a character as my mom. So yeah, I can't really comment on how she would have been, except that I'm sure she would have been great. And I think that Dodo Denny was very funny and very good. All the parents, let's just segue to that. Dodo was very funny. I thought that Roy Kinnear, who played Veruca's dad, was hysterical, probably the funniest guy on set. Jack Albertson, whose character takes a lot of guff. Here's my opportunity to say that of all the people on set, and we all got along well, Jack Albertson was probably the nicest guy on set. He was just a complete sweetheart, very nice to the kids.
You were kind of a mischievous kid on the set. Did you ever worried about getting fired?
I've never been asked that question before, so I have to think back to when I was 11. I don't think that, again, I was directable, and I don't think that I never heard any talk of that. No one ever threatened me with that. I have no personal direct experience. If my mother was alive, I guess you could have asked her, and maybe she would have heard something that I didn't, but nobody ever came to me with that, and therefore, no, I didn't really have any, the director and he was tough, actually. Mel Stewart was a rather screamy, yelly director, and he was tough. I asked him later, because, and by the way, I should explain for the viewers, there's a shot of Gene Wilder in an interview segment, and people say, "So, Gene, how's working with the kids?" And he said something to the effect of, "4 of them are fantastic, and one of them I'm going to shoot in the head in the morning, or one of them I'm going to strangle in the morning." And that is, I think, a main reason why people always ask me questions about this. Now, first of all, I spoke with Mel Stewart later, and I said, "So, how bad was I? Like, was this really, an issue or whatever?" And he said, "No, you were just high." I think I got the word spirited from him. You had high spirits. You were just being a kid and running around. And I asked Rusty Goff, who was an Oompa Loompa and is still alive. There are only 1 or 2 of them still alive. There were 10 originally. Now there's just a few because little people don't tend to live as long. And he said the same thing. He said, "Oh, no, "Oh, Paris, you were fine. You were lovely. Everything. Yeah. Did you have energy? Yeah, of course. But so I think it would have been the director that would be doing the firing, and apparently I was fine as in his books.
Well,
Um,
thank heavens for that, because I can't think of anybody else that would have been better to play that role.
well,
You
thank you.
you described Gene Wilder as a soft-spoken, gentle, lovely man, but slightly
Mhm.
off kilter. What did you mean by that?
That's interesting. I don't know if off kilter is the words that I would use today. I'm in New York City and I read on the internet or somewhere that Gene Wilder is appearing in Stamford, Connecticut. And I haven't seen him for years, right? It's many years later. What he's doing is he's doing a thing that he basically did for charity. It was a revival theater in Stamford, Connecticut. And it was called the Avon Theater. I think it's still there. I hope it's still there. And they would show something called Wilder's Picks. Wilder's Picks once a year. Gene, who lived in Stamford and in Benedict Canyon here in Los Angeles, where I live, he had two houses, would come. They would show a Wilder movie, and he would actually be there, and he would do a Q&A afterwards and so forth. So the year that I got wind of it, it was Silver Streak. I went, they showed Silver Streak. I went up afterwards with a large poster of Willy Wonka, and I went to speak with him. And I said, "Hi, Gene. I'm Paris Themmen. I was Mike Teevee in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, you were a brat." And I said, "Oh yeah, well, thanks, Gene. I'm 50 something now, so maybe less of a brat." And he said, "Oh no, no, of course, certainly Paris." And he took the poster and he signed it to my favorite brat, and I have that. So I was his favorite brat, apparently. I saw at one point someone asked him the other side, his side of this question that you're asking me. And he looked at the camera as if, and when I'm watching it, it's like he's looking right at me. And he said, "Oh, but Paris, you know I love you now." So draw your own conclusions. Oh, off kilter. I don't think I would use the word off kilter. Gene was soft spoken. Just you know, if you've seen his performances, first of all, he sometimes gets very yelly and like he goes to 11, as they would say in Spinal Tap. I never ever saw him do that in person. Okay. But then he also gets those sort of like moments where he's a little bit, let me see if I want to give a good description of it, but like you can tell he's thinking, and maybe he's in his own place, you know?
He's contemplating.
He's contemplating and he's not necessarily sharing with you everything that he's thinking. That would be a better version of perhaps the impression I had of him rather than off kilter. Off kilter, it sounds like he's off balance. It's not what I was going for, I don't think.
So tell me, Paris, do you remember your reaction when you first saw The Chocolate Room?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the chocolate room was, first of all, let me just start out by saying that I had a rare experience as an 11-year-old. If you are going to be in a movie, I recommend that you be in Willy Wonka, the Chocolate Factory. As an 11-year-old, it was everything that you would want to have as an experience as a young actor. It was the first time I'd ever left the country and been to Europe. So that was very exciting. Different languages, different cultures. It was a full-on feature film at a studio. It wasn't an American studio, but it was at a place called Bavarian Filmworks, which is the biggest one in Germany, I would imagine. I'm guessing, or it was then. It was in Munich, Germany. Music, great cast. We've been talking about the cast based on a book by Roald Dahl, who's one of the most important children's writers of the 20th century, I think it's fair to say. Gene, who, whatever there is between us or was a brilliant comedian. And I love Young Frankenstein, for instance. That's the one that I personally am, and Blazing Saddles. Again, what I would call some of the funniest movies of the 20th century, along with maybe Some Like It Hot and Spinal Tap and maybe some other stuff, and great sets. So among the other great things of being about being in this film was that I'm gonna be on an amazing set, and meanwhile, over in the other stage, they're already building the inventing room set that I talked about, or they're working on the Wonka Vision set, or they're working on, fizzy lifting drinks where they're lifting us up into the air, like all of these great, cool, mostly practical effects that they were going to send us through. But the pièce de résistance was the chocolate room. It took up the entire soundstage, and I think most of you know how big a soundstage is. It's not a small thing. It's not the size of a football stadium, but it's a really big room. And they used all of it. And they designed it in 360 degrees. There was no CG. There was no, we're going to build this and then we're going to turn around and we'll dress that and then it was all there. And we had a view up from above, which means they must have built a huge scaffold for those stairs somehow. And so we come in at the top of it, which means we get a vista. A vista or a panorama is always more impressive than sort of being down in it. You actually get the sense of it all. The river, the boat wasn't moving yet. It was actually parked over there, or maybe not even on set yet. They might have been working on the boat in a different room, but eventually they dropped the boat into that set. And eventually the boat then went down the river in a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean fashion on a track with a cable, which I assume was pulled by a winch, probably not powered by Oompa Loompas. Although Rusty likes to say that Pepe, was it Pepe? One of the Oompa Loompas had a wheel on the boat, and it was just on a pin, and you could do it freely. But again, this is another one of those stories. I can't really tell you what was inside of the Oompa Loompa's head, but my understanding is that he actually thought he was steering. So he was going like this. It's styrofoam. It's something like AstroTurf. It's plastic. But, like imagine the best Christmas decorations in front of someone's house ever, on a massive scale. And so it was really fantastic. And they did, in fact, shoot my initial reaction to it. You've probably read that. In my case, because I was aware of that, and when I went to the showing, the premiere, they had a few of them, but one was in London, one was in New York, one was in LA. When I went to the New York one where I lived, I remember thinking, was that the first take? Did they use the first take? I think they actually used a second take. But okay, we're all trained actors. We can see it for the first time and then come out and see it for the first time again. And then the rest of that story is that Julie Dawn Cole, who played Veruca, actually had been invited beforehand and had lunch by the shores of the river one day previously. So as she likes to say it, she's the only one who was actually acting, because she was acting as if she had seen it for the first time. But no, it was just a fantastic set.
Well, you certainly encapsulated how we all felt when we saw the room for the first time. What was the most difficult scene for you in the movie?
Well, I guess it depends on how you mean difficult. If you mean from an acting standpoint, my two close-up, there's basically two moments in the film when we're very much focusing on me. And one of them is the interview scene. And I'm watching TV, and I'm probably about this big in frame, something like that. I'm about like that. They're right on me. I'm looking at the TV. They're firing questions at me and that kind of thing. And the other time my face is this big is at the end. I have a monologue. It's a quick monologue, but I talk about how they made a television. You photograph something and it goes over your head, millions of tiny pieces where it's all put together again in the same order. So as a young actor, those were the most difficult moments. But if you mean uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable, or difficult in terms of stunts and things like that, my most uncomfortable moment is a quick shot, but it took us, I don't know, maybe an hour to shoot it. Here, I have a picture again, I think. Well, this is the scene anyway. Here you go. Oh, you know what? Here, I'm going to interject here. The reason this is signed is because I have I have a website and I sell things that are signed by me and the other kids. Here, I think you can see there's a contract there. That's signed by me and three of the other kids. And the name of that website is wonkashop.com. So wonkashop.com. I'm supposed to say it 3 times to drive it into your head, right? Anyway, I sell things that are signed by me and the other kids on wonkashop.com. So, oh yeah, I can't find the picture right now, but there are 2 large styrofoam fingers, and they're holding me like this. And I have one line to deliver, and that is, "Where are you taking me?" But in order to get that, they had to put me in a flying rig, which meant that all of my weight was like on my crotch. I have another funny picture somewhere of me standing on the shoulder of 2 German stagehands. One of them smoking a cigarette and looking very bored. But they're just trying to take the weight off of my, not midriff, but I think you get the idea. Anyway, oh yeah, here's the joke. Jack Albertson and Peter had to do the same thing for fizzy lifting drinks. And at one point, Jack, Peter tells me, looked over at Peter and said, "They should have called it the Nutcracker Suite." So those flying harnesses are very uncomfortable. Let's leave it at that.
Did you get to keep anything from the movie set?
I didn't. Julie kept a bunch of stuff. She kept a gobstopper and at least 1 golden ticket and some other things. I had my script. At one point, I had a little Wonka label, and I think gave it to a girlfriend years and years ago to score the points and never saw it again. Other difficult stunts were, but all of the rest of the things I'm going to describe, I enjoyed. Because again, spirited, right? Throw me around. Like, let's do some stuff. Let's have fun, right? The exploding candy in the candy room. They yanked a wire that they had tied to the back of my belt, and they yanked me backwards into a bunch of pots and pans that were on like a chicken wire thing here, and they all actual copper pans just like fell down, hit me in the head, So I sprang up and was like, "Let's do it again." And they were like, "No, no, 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 we got it." The foam that came out in the Wonka wash was fire extinguisher foam, caustic, chemically fire extinguisher foam that gave adults rashes, and they were all rather cold, and we had to change because we got wet in between sets. I liked it. I didn't get a rash. I was happy. Give me more. In the movie, there's this whole sort of thing. It looks like they probably took it from a tuba or from an old ship. I mean, it looks like it's a big convex. Let's go with convex instead of concave. It goes like this. And it's gouts of the stuff is coming off all over me. And if you look in the movie, I'm like, but man, I liked it. I was like, let's go. Let's do more.
You really were the perfect person to play that role, I got to tell you. Now, a lot of people today may not realize that when the movie was first released in 1971, it was not a success until it started being shown on TV in the 80s. Did that surprise you?
I'm thinking about the degree to which it surprised me. Again, you're asking questions that I've had before, but you're asking them with a different tilt. So what you're saying is true. First of all, it was only so popular. It was made in association with Quaker Oats, who put up some or most of the money. It was produced by a guy named David Walper. It was distributed originally by Paramount, and eventually they let go of the rights and Warner Brothers picked them up. I think it pretty much made it. It was made for about $1 million or $1.5 million, which even in 1970 was not that much. I think they did a really good job of stretching their budget and making something interesting from not that much. I guess I would have been disappointed. I mean, I was hoping to show up at school and, that it would have been, more of a springboard to my career, although I did go right into the Rothschilds. So I would say more disappointed than surprised if I was going to put a word on that. But I mean, it was big enough that I wasn't that disappointed. And obviously, later on, disappointment is the last thing that I feel, starting from when they started showing it once a year, similar to Wizard of Oz. with which I'm happy to say it's often associated, is appointment TV that show it once a year. It just has grown from there. I mean, at that point, then it really started to pick up speed. I have absolutely no complaints about what it has become since then, obviously.
I want to clear up a misconception that I think a lot of people may have because they assume you made a whole lot of money from the movie over the years, but that's not true, is it?
So, yes, that is, you're correct that is not true to a point. So, for years, for up until, I'm going to say, let me figure this out, 10, 12, about 12, 14 years ago, you definitely would have been true. So I made 500 a week for 9 weeks. Okay. And that's not a lot, right? I think that I was one of the better paid of the kids. Okay. And the problem was this: the signatory agreement between the agreement or the contract between the signatory producers and SAG was not signed to cover residuals for ancillary markets. Now, you probably know what ancillary markets are, but just to be clear, that was VHS, it was eventually Blu-ray, it was eventually cable. Now it's streaming, later it'll be holographs, whatever it is, it's markets that are not, in this case, my contract did cover the once a year that they would show it on network TV. So I still get residuals from the film when they show it on network TV. Now, here's where it changed a little bit about 12 years ago. Warner Brothers and I now have a licensing agreement that has to do with my face. If my face is on commercial products like a pinball machine that I have in my garage or anything else in the world, they can now use my face as an 11-year-old for licensing purposes. And once every 10 years, they pay me something for that. And that's the nuts and bolts I'm not going to get into. But they pay me something that I'm very happy with. And they've done it twice now. 12 years ago and 2 years ago, I received that balloon payment for my image globally. And that is significant enough that I, to some extent, forgive all the many years that I didn't receive those other payments.
Well, that's very good to hear because every time I go to a casino and I see the Willy Wonka slot machine, I'm wondering, do any of these kids make any money from the use of their image?
Licensing.
Good. Well deserved. So tell me, you got a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from New York University.
I did.
But you left acting. Were you planning to pursue an acting career when you went to university?
When I was 14, I stopped acting, or 15, something like that. I just wanted to be a kid. I was doing it from age 6. So I took a few years off from, let's call it 15 to 18. And then when I was going to go to college, I was like, well, what do I know? And I knew theater. So I auditioned for a few schools, and one of them was NYU. And and I was then able to choose from a few different acting programs. So I went into Stella Adler's program, and I studied with Stella Adler. I did that, and I also was at the master's program for a year or two. And then I got out of school, and my acting teachers were like, you acted so much. What you really need to do is just go and live life. Go and see the world. And so they felt like they didn't say this to me, but this is how I interpret it, that my acting was self-reflective, that I needed to go out and experience life as a non-actor in order to bring more truth to my acting. So basically, I decided to go see the world, and then I sort of drifted off and fell into this whole world of international travel. And I had access, by the time I was 30, I'd been to 30 countries around the world. So I would stay at youth hostels, and I would backpack, and I would see the world from the ground level and see cultures. And I wanted to go the Amazon jungle. I wanted to go eventually to Mount Everest Base Camp. I wanted to go to the Sahara Desert and to Borneo, and also, cathedrals of Europe and French Renaissance, Italian Renaissance and French Impressionism and all that stuff. But I really wanted to go out there. And it's very seductive, So it started to fill in my life the place that acting and artistry and theater did. And honestly, from that time until now, and I've been in a variety of careers, there's been a sort of I would lean one way, I would lean another. I eventually went back and worked a lot in film production. I worked in New York and San Francisco and LA on a variety of projects, PA, a little bit of ADing, second AD, that's assistant director. I went back, I did some commercials in my 40s, so a little back and forth. Oh, you know what I also did was casting. I was working in casting in LA for a while. I used to photograph and direct actors through their audition process and then send the video where it was going. So as you mentioned, I also was a financial advisor for 6 years in business at Citigroup. I was at Walt Disney Imagineering. That's tangentially related to entertainment as well, right? I was a show systems manager for them. So all through my life, it's been like, well, there's art over here and there's business and back and forth. And I would sort of vacillate and oscillate between the two of those things.
And you certainly have done it well. In 2003, all of you, Peter Ostrom, Julie Dawn Cole, Denise Nickerson, Michael Boliner, you all took part in a terrific documentary called After They Were Famous, where the whole group went back to Munich, Germany, where the movie was filmed. Was that a fun experience for you?
It was, absolutely. I have been to Munich a few times in my travels, but this was with everyone, and specifically to go back and visit. The gates are still there. They don't say Wonka on them anymore, but they're in Munich at the Bavarian Gas Works, I believe, and the studio is there. When I went to that studio, they had the sub from Das Boot. They had some stuff from Cabaret, and they have a gift shop. And in the very back of the gift shop, there was like a picture of like the boat or something like that from Willy Wonka, but they aren't pushing it. You know what I mean? Anyway, I went and I spent time. I think you saw me get misty when I was in the studio. Is that the right word? The soundstage. When I was in the soundstage where they did the chocolate room, it brought back memories. Of course, it was fun. Naturally, I mean.
Yeah, it was a very, very fun documentary to watch. And I'm wondering, Paris, as you've grown into adulthood and grown older, have your memories or your perspective about being in Willy Wonka, have they changed over the years?
Well, first of all, everybody has baby pictures, right? But everyone has seen my baby pictures, right? So people ask me a lot of the same questions over and over again, not always. As I said, you often have a slightly different perspective on a similar kind of a question. But when your brain is constantly told, and as a judge, I'm sure you're interested in the idea of memory and how memory can change and how memory is often wrong. So in my case, people, even starting at 12, 14, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, they ask me about these things. And so I'm constantly being asked to send my mind back to those days. I think I'm remembering it accurately, but what do I know? So that's one thing which I find interesting, is that I'm an example of I'm like a human experiment. If you took a person and had them experience something at a young age, and then constantly throughout their lives ask them to recount it, what does that do to their memory of it? I mean, I like to think it preserves it in a way which is greater than it might be if nobody asked me about it for 50 years. In terms of how it has changed, I don't know that it has changed, except that as it's grown in popularity and as I have sat at my table at Comic-Cons and had conversations with people like you, I have heard everyone's perspective on this thing that I did, and it is overwhelmingly positive. I mean, about me, yeah, sure, but mostly about the film, about what the film means to people.
And how does that affect you when people tell you how much the movie means to them?
Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful. I feel lucky. I feel fortunate. I feel
blessed.
Well, I don't use the word blessed, but if you wanted to call it blessed, you could call it blessed. But yes, whatever blessed is, that definitely.
Well, you should feel special for sure.
Well, special in the sense, not because I'm a special person and I'm so special, but special in the sense that I was in special circumstances. I like to think I rose to the occasion and I did a good job. So good for me, but mostly lucky that I happened to be at the intersection of preparation and opportunity so that it could happen to me.
Well, here's a question I'll bet you everybody asks you. What did you think of the remakes, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory with Johnny Depp, and then the Wonka movie with Timothée Chalamet? Do you have an opinion about those two movies?
The second one, actually, meaning Timothée Chalamet's Wonka, as directed by Paul King, I actually did like. I actually thought that it was good. It wasn't, because it's a prequel, it kind of gets a pass on whether or not it was as good as Willy Wonka. You know, it's different. I mean, personally, my favorite is still our film of the three. If any of them caught lightning in a bottle, I definitely think it would have been ours.
Oh, 100%. I think
Well,
everybody agrees with that.
You're of this age, but if you ask a 10-year-old, you might get a different answer, you know? Like they might have been like, because that maybe that's not, they don't need something that looks dated and is charming and da-da. They need, you know, CG and stuff and effects and things, and they're happier. So it's not, anyway, my opinion is not so hot on the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and better, definitely better. For me, Willy Wonka, you know, Wonka and then Charlie down here. That's where I've got them.
Well, now I'm going to confess to you why I think you really are special. And it's because on March the 13th, 2018, you appeared as a contestant on Jeopardy. You came in second. And a few years before that, your wife, Nikki, appeared on the show 3 times. Now, that's got to be special, don't you think?
Well, yes. I mean, I guess I could take a little more credit for that one because I'm an adult. Nikki did win twice. And I don't know statistically how many Jeopardy couples there are, but I know that there aren't that many. You could probably count them. I'm guessing that there have been a lot of people on Jeopardy, but I'm only aware of a few. There's probably less than 10 or 20 couples like that. So good for us.
I would say another reason you're very special, Mr. Paris Themmen, is that you appeared in an episode of Star Trek Voyager called Virtuoso. Now, that's got to be special. That must have been fun.
I'm of the age that I used to watch Star Trek. I was very, very happy to be in the Star Trek universe. And I looked a lot like the guy who played the holodoc. They put an appliance on my nose and I was an alien and I didn't actually have any lines. But the best thing about on that episode of Star Trek Voyager is nearby, they had a set, and the set was the bridge. There was a chair like this one, only wider, with the little buttons. And so I sat in the chair and I took some pictures and I pretended to say engage. And I was in costume in my outfit on Star Trek. So in that sense, I exist in that universe and I'm very happy about that.
I should say so. Now, because you said things should be mentioned 3 times, I'm going to remind my viewers, there is a website called wonkashop.com. You can buy autographed photos and artwork from the movie. Yes. There's a beautiful welcome video from Paris Themmen on the homepage of that website, which brought me to tears, I must say. So please take a look at that screen, which is now showing on your screen, wonkashop.com.
Oh, thank you.
Well,
thank you for that.
Paris, it's been a real pleasure meeting you, having this opportunity to reminisce. I know you get a lot of interview requests. You're very selective about which ones you accept. So thank you very, very much for taking the time to appear on our show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you for all your questions. And it's been a pleasure.
Our guest has been Paris Themmen, who will forever be remembered as Mike Teevee from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producers, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli of the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my editor, Isaiah Sharalampidis, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.